This woman is coming to talk to us about the topic of CEO succession and the challenges that it brings. What's so fabulous about someone like Jill is that not only did she start the CEO practice at Egon Zehnder 17 years ago, so she kind of knows a little bit about the subject. She's also literally in the process as chairwoman of Egon Zehnder, working on the CEO succession of her own firm. So there's, by that smile, there's a few interesting comments that'll come. So with that, I would love, there's so much to say, and you guys are laughing it up, right? So yeah, you know. There's so much to say about Jill, but I will just pass on with those brief words of introduction. And thank you for being here. It's just a total treat that you're here.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I'll remember that description. Oh, it's just fantastic looking at this room of people and what a community that we have here. And Amy, Erica, Alex, this, to create this community is just fantastic. And thank you for asking me to say a few words this morning. Look, it's incredible to be in this room with so many thought leaders and practitioners. But I'm not a thought leader, so I'll be here to share some practical stories from our work in boardrooms. It does feel very poignant that it's today, that it's now. We at Egon Zehnder have announced our partnership with Mobius, and that feels really important to us to almost like a blessing this week, to bless that partnership and to see what can come of that beautiful relationship. But what I'm going to do today, my task that I've been given, is to talk to you about CEO succession and some of the assumptions that are made about CEO succession that are actually getting in the way. So that's what I'll try and do. And I'll use some real boardroom stories to try and do that, to bring it to life. I'd also love this opportunity, and maybe I'm being a bit cheeky here, but just to talk about what we see as the global movement of leadership that is needed in the world right now. It is a brand new era of leadership that's required. I know that everybody in this room is on that shared mission to make it a better world through better leadership. But as also at Egon Zehnder, what we know is for all the work we might do to make that a reality, if we don't look at the boardrooms where the decisions are made on CEO succession, we will not get any further. So quite a bit of my theme today will be about boardrooms getting in the way. So we're going to look at why CEO succession is an opportunity, what gets in the way, and how we can all help. But last night when I was talking to Amy, she said, you've got to tell some of your story up front, your personal story, so I will try. Leadership for what is a good starting point. But 22 years ago, I remember being very excited to see a room full of wide-eyed consultants listening to a speech from Egon. And he said, if we place a CEO, his or her team will all grow and flourish. And their teams, in turn, will grow. The customers, the shareholders, the families of all those stakeholders will actually flourish and grow. And I suppose that, for me, 22 years ago, was when I found the meaning of what we do and how we change lives. And that was a really important moment for me, and a sense that leadership has to be a force for good. And that's what this room is also all about. So that's the opportunity. Telling my own story, I have to admit, I'd put this right at the end. But let me try and share a bit of the story for the last few months. So as Alex said, I've recently been elected chairwoman of the firm. Mark Thornton told me I must not disregard my femininity, so I am a chairwoman, proud to be. And I don't formally take up the role for another 9 days, so not there yet. And I can still change my mind, and so can the partners. So, look, I had to go through a lot of introspection to understand why I was reluctant at first to actually stand in the election. And there are many very special people in this room who actually helped me on that journey to help me decide to actually go with my convictions. But if I hadn't been on the journey with everybody in this room over the last 5 years, then I don't think I would be stood here today as the next chair of Egon Zehnder. I've had to do a lot of work at an identity level, a lot of dropping my shields, understanding my triggers, recognizing my self-limiting beliefs, releasing my lover and my dreamer, allowing my dream to sort of shine. And it's hard, and I have a lot of empathy for the CEOs that we're going to be talking about today. Because even before I've started the role, some people are saying, yes, it's inspiring and being wonderful. Yet, I know I'm also being judged already, even before I've started. And, that hurts. So I can sort of see how CEOs and chairmen have to gird themselves up and shield themselves again so that they do protect themselves from the things that can hurt them. And that's going to be my big challenge. I don't want to be that person. I want to let go of those shields and just be me. So that's really my story. And I think it was a journey of discovering more about me and my sense of self, and having the conviction that if there is a bigger vision for the firm, then I have to stand by that conviction and just be me and go for it. So that's my story. And I really want our firm, together with Mobius and everybody in this room, to unleash the potential of our clients. That's what this is all about. So I've got a lot to learn, and I'm going to talk to you about what the boardrooms have got to learn. So finding, assessing, developing, coaching CEOs is what we do at Egon Zehnder. And we partner with boards in the complex and tricky world of CEO succession. So I'll try and share some stories which talk about the competition for that corner office of the CEO. And I'll try and cut through some of the jargon and cut through the sort of aura of CEO succession and try and tell it just as it is. So I think we can agree the world has definitely changed. It's become, as Jennifer would tell us, far less knowable, predictable, and increasingly complex. And for each of us in this room, I'm sure that's how it feels. It's overwhelming sense of all the demands and expectations on us. So multiply that many times, and that's probably the pressure that CEOs are under, and why so many of them are looking or feeling out of their depth. And when they get it right, then what Egon said about placing a CEO comes true. But when they don't, really the trust in leadership just plummets further, and it can impact markets and communities around the world. So this is what's at stake. We've got an opportunity to build a better world through leadership, and we need to bring the most senior leaders with us on that journey. But some of them have been up in the sort of echelons of the corporate world and actually feel quite untouchable. And our task, what we are being called to do, is to encourage those people to come on a journey that is courageous, that is heroic, as Erica would tell us. So this is why, really, NPI, Next Practice Institute, means so much and is at the core of what we do. And I do believe that everybody in this room has a role to play, whether you're working at board level or not, because everybody in the corporate world reports up to the boardroom. But it does start with ourselves. If we can't transform ourselves, then we don't deserve to go on the journey with the leaders who are trying to transform themselves and their organizations. So it was really that brought us together with Mobius 5 years ago. We brought them in to develop our partners, and on the very first program, Erica, Amy, and I, Lane, and others were saying, actually, this is what we need to take to clients. We have to unlock the big four potential in our clients to make it a better world. But to do that, I think it needs a type of leadership that is more inclusive, more compassionate, more nurturing. And I think that teams and organizations around the world are craving that. But first of all, let me tell you some of the facts about the lonely corner office of the CEO. First one. So CEO tenure is shortening. 37% of public companies have had 3 CEOs in the last decade. So you've hardly got time to get your feet under the table and you're already being exited. Secondly, despite the fact that the average set of board directors, calculated on the back of an envelope, costs around £8 million in the UK and $17 million per annum here in the US. Despite that, nearly 40% of CEO successions for very large companies were unplanned. 40% unplanned. I mean, you might ask, what are we paying them for? What are we paying those boards for if 40% go unplanned? Almost 50% of those CEOs who were ousted left for one of two reasons. First reason, poor performance. Second reason, ethics. Neither of those sound like a force for good for me in the world. The fourth point, over 80% of new CEOs are internally promoted, which is great. But let's look closer at that fact. If over 80% of CEOs were internally promoted, those boards knew what the strategy and vision were that should have implied what they need in their leaders, and they should be developing those qualities in their leaders. And that's not what's happening. We did a survey which we call Personal Reflections of over 400 CEOs around the world. And what that tells us is that internal promoted candidates for CEO, only 28% felt that they'd been well prepared for that promotion. So what does it tell us? It tells us that there is a widening CEO capability gap, that the specs for a CEO are ever more transformational, and the population of candidates for that is shrinking vastly because CEO development is not keeping up. And if you're not keeping up in this world, then you are going backwards. So my fear is that that gap becomes a huge gulf. I know if you asked any of my colleagues in this room, they'd tell you that the demanding specifications for transformational leaders is very high. But before, the war for talent focused much more on experience. It looked at skills, experience, value creation. And we still want all of that. Boards still want all of that. But boards now also want digital experience, understanding cyber, developing markets, investor relations, all at an experience level. But we know that that's the tip of the iceberg. What really we need to help boards see is the true depths of a leader that aren't visible. Today, the qualities needed are entirely dynamic, and they're much trickier to assess and to develop. In the new world, we need to see leaders that are evolving at a deeper identity level, finding their inner purpose, shifting their motivations and traits. All the things that we care about in this room. But how many leaders can get an organization to step up and be innovative, not just those people with innovation in their job title? How many CEOs understand what does it mean to create psychological safety so that everyone in the organization feels that they can take more risks and experiment, which is so important to the future of leadership? How many can meet their people where they are and guide them into real accountability and entrepreneurship? We need many, many more leaders who can do this, but on a human level, on a compassionate level. And this is what really binds Egon Zehnder and Mobius together. We realized that we couldn't just find these CEOs through our search work, but that we had to help these leaders to develop themselves. And the truth is, the world is changing far faster than the organizations can keep up with. They need to be grooming their leaders, but that just isn't happening at a fast enough rate. And you have to develop leaders today not knowing what's around the corner. You have to be thinking, what might emerge? What capacities are they going to have to hold whatever comes forth, that emerges from the world today? So it's not linear. Changing tack a little bit, this actually goes to the board's fiduciary or legal responsibilities. Because one of the most important, if not the most important role of a chairman is to decide when is the right time to take an established CEO and to replace them with a developing leader who can master that uncertain future. But what we see is often box ticking, vacuous, late in the day CEO succession planning. And more than that, it's usually far too late for development. So all of us in this room are needed. We're all being called on to do this with not just the corporate world, with NGOs, I'd like to think in the political world as well, but there is so much more to do. So what does our CEO work tell us? There are 5 assumptions I'd like to share with you today. Sorry. Not very good at doing the clicker. So these are 5 assumptions that people make about CEO succession that we'd like to talk about, because unless we crack these, then I don't think things are going to change. And my worry is that the CEOs who are appointed by boards actually are part of the problem. The problems, I think, sit in the CEOs, the incumbent CEOs, and the boards that appoint them. So we'll go through these. So the first one, are boards well equipped for their CEO role, to do the CEO succession? And simply put, they're not. In reality, only 1 or 2 board members will have ever done a CEO succession before, and the rest are novices. Let me give you a number and a story. So shockingly, 44% of boards do not have any succession cover. The story, a consumer company where we'd done some board effectiveness reviews. And I can remember sitting in this beautiful, lofty, high-ceilinged office in a London square, hearing the chairman say that they were very lucky because they had 4 CEO successors ready and waiting. And I had a huge respect for this chairman, but maybe not on this topic. Over the next 2 years, it really saddened me to see what unfolded and the waste of talent. So one of the 4 left to be a CEO elsewhere, and he did not even know he was on their succession plan. The second, for health reasons. The third ran a region and the performance plummeted. And the 4th had never been asked if he wanted the role, and he didn't. Never asked. So what's the moral of the story? Boards need to do much more to substantiate the succession cover that they think they have, to really understand the motivations, the identity, the sense of purpose that the leaders have, to see whether they can make that transition to that corner office. So the boards have a responsibility to close this gap, and we have to help them do that. But before I go any further, for those of you who might not be as familiar with boardrooms, let me just share a few thoughts. So typically, boards comprise of about 8 to 12 people. The CEO in many countries is a board member, but not in all countries. In the US, it's usually the CEO, but not the CFO. In Germany, not even the CEO is a member of the supervisory board. And in most other countries, you've probably got 2 or more executives on the board, and the rest are non-executive. And that means they show up around 6 to 8 times a year, for 1 day, maybe 2. Their responsibilities I really have got to get my clicker. Their responsibilities include everything on this list and more. The agendas are packed full. You can see where I'm going. Typically, there are many pulls on their time, and what gets squeezed is often strategic discussion through the year. So they're very good at doing the annual once-a-year, 1 or 2 day piece, but it's like a vacuum for the rest of the year. And as the world is at the moment, you cannot have a vacuum on what's emerging that's important strategically. And guess what else gets squeezed? CEO succession. That tends to be annual at best, and half a day is probably the average. So maybe it's no surprise. And despite the inevitability of CEO succession, the most common refrain we hear from boards is we should have started earlier. So what's preventing them from doing this? sadly, it's often the CEO themselves. Because it should be the chair setting the tone for the board. But if you've got a dominant hero as a chief exec, not only can they restrict the board, but they can actually intimidate the board. And so what happens is they delay the CEO succession until the very last minute, until their legacy is secure. And they look for successors who look just like me. And what do? They overstay their welcome. So actually, the very incumbents in the roles are often the problems. I can think of several boards who have put up with that for many years, and then to see them in a completely different situation with an open CEO who actually knows that they don't know all the answers, where egos are not the defining barrier. That's what we need. And to get to CEOs who actually understand, they'll see a problem and they'll look at it in an adaptive way, as Zehnder is telling us on our stream this week. They'll look at it in an adaptive way and they won't try and solve it with technical solutions. So there's so much to learn. But what does good look like in CEO succession? So I used to say it looks like starting 3 years earlier. And the CEO practice today tell me I'm completely wrong, and that's not it at all. It is actually continuous. It's a continuous cycle. It's like an audit committee. It's a routine that goes through the year. It's perpetual. CEO succession should not have a beginning, and it should not have an end. Whoever is in the post, and whenever they got there. So it also begins with looking at what the strategy is. What's the vision for this organization, and what does that require in its leaders? And looking at that on a continuous basis. Looking at your internal candidates who might have that potential in them and knowing how to develop it. Looking externally, of course, but looking at your internals and seeing that infinite potential that they have. But it's not static. CEO succession is dynamic, as I've just described, and we have to look at a wider perspective. So when I'm thinking now about our CEO, I'm not just thinking about who's the best CEO for Egon Zehnder. I'm looking at what's the constellation of leaders that this firm needs. And how do we look at that in a different way? Absolutely critical as well to all of this is integration. And pay tribute here to Mark and Lena, who came up with our accelerated integration for our firm. This is what we do with many, many clients. But it's not just integration with the top executive committee. It's actually integration with the statutory board as well, and that bit often gets neglected. Let me share another fact from our CEO survey. So the shocking truth is that most CEOs, or more CEOs, are likely to ask their husband, their wife, their spouse, whether they're doing a good job. Not as a spouse, but whether they're doing a good job as a CEO. Only 28% of CEOs feel they get good feedback from their boards. I mean, that is just shocking. The person with the most responsibility on their shoulders typically gets the least feedback. And that has to change, and we can all help in that. Even when people know what good practice is, sometimes it goes wrong. Let me share another story. This is an international services company, very gritty business, thin margins. And the CEO had only ever been told that he was doing a great job. He'd obviously got a good coach too, because the coach, he came to the board and he said, actually, I'm starting to think about the next chapter in my career. And so he said, you ought to start succession over the next couple of years. And I was at the very next board meeting when the chairman asked that CEO to leave the room because he'd decided that, in effect, the chief exec had served notice on the board and that he had to go as soon as possible. I mean, good succession planning out of the window. And these are the stories at Egon Zehnder that we hear week in, week out. These aren't one-offs. I hope we can really help make sure that more people are ready to take on the roles that they're asked to do and that we have fewer disruptive transitions. But my key message is, if boards don't catch up, nothing will change. The leadership issues that everyone I know in this room sees will be perpetuated. And those very senior people on boards, who I have huge regard for so many of them, but we see little correlation between the size and complexity of an organisation and how well they do CEO succession. That can't be right. So our global movement for a better type of leadership needs your help, but it needs to touch boards as well as the leaders in the executive ranks. Let's turn to the second assumption. The best candidates want the job. Increasingly not. They look up at their boss and they say, I do not want to live that life. I do not want to be that person. I'm not sure I want the job. And we're here to actually say they can do it their way. This is, you don't have to be like your boss to be the next CEO. Let me bring to life with another story, which is familiar to a few people in this room. And I tell it to show a divergence that's happening between the way boards think about leadership and the way we're all thinking about leadership. We were together with a nominations committee. The chairman sat at the end of the table and actually cast a very lonely figure. There was no one within 3 meters of him. We'd looked at external candidates, but on this day, we were looking at the internal candidates, and there was really good diversity. But the best person internally who could drive transformation did not want the job. He looked up at his boss. He didn't want to spend his time at Davos doing the things that person did. He didn't really want to be like that person at all in any way. So he didn't want the job. That very same board that at the beginning of the process had said, we want a transformational leader, an agile leader, we've got to transform this whole organisation. On this day, what they were saying was, give me proof. Give me proof that the candidates have made an impact. Give me proof that they have the resilience. Give me proof that they've got the fire in the belly to want the job. And he didn't. He was also really comfortable in showing vulnerability. The board saw that as a weakness, a flaw in him as a human being. A human being. At the beginning of the search, they'd said they were 99% sure they were going to go external. And when we tried to talk to them about developing the internal candidates, they said, no, they can sink or swim. We're not going to invest in development. This won't be unfamiliar to my colleagues in the room. They could tell their own stories, I'm sure. But thankfully, and as a sort of accelerated intervention with the combined faculty of Egon Zehnder and Mobius actually worked its magic and showed that individual that you can lead in a different way in this world. And he leapfrogged everybody to be enthusiastically at the front of the queue. But the moral of this story is that boards need to leave behind their beliefs in the old power, in old forms of motivation that they grew up with. And please don't misinterpret my message. I'm not saying that, we don't need resilient CEOs, ones that are going to deliver and are profit-oriented. That's not what I'm saying. It's why they do it and how they do it. And another thing for boards, the word identity is not in the boardroom vocabulary. And yet we know how important that is in unlocking the potential of leaders. Let me share a Native American story that I heard from a colleague. A grandfather tells his grandson, I have 2 wolves fighting in my heart. One of them is vengeful, fearful, envious, deceitful. The other is compassionate, loving, generous, truthful, serene. And the very smart little grandson says, so Grandpa, which one will win the fight? And the grandfather answers, the one that I feed. Why do I tell that tale? Because boards do not appreciate what they are feeding, what they're encouraging, what they're rewarding, and of course what they might be missing. And we want to help boards catch up because they need to catch up with where leadership is headed. And all of you in this room have your version of where leadership is headed. And that's what we need to get into the boardrooms. Boards have to get on that track and not compound the issue. And the hard truth is that the very incumbent CEOs in those roles are deterring the next generation of CEOs. And again, we have to change that. Let's look at our third assumption. Becoming a CEO is absolutely the end goal. And it's not. It's not the end goal at all. It's the start line. And that can feel, I'm feeling it myself at the moment. That is just the very beginning. And you feel like you've got to start development all over again and more, which is very exciting, but also quite overwhelming. But, we are going through a seismic shift. We're moving away from the dominant hero leader to what Erica helps us to understand, which is for leaders who are courageous enough to go on a brave, courageous hero's journey, to sense and respond, to be a voyager, in order to transform themselves and their organizations. Very sadly, I'd say, that shift, that seismic shift that is going in that direction, appears to be going in the opposite direction in the political world. But if we're working with corporate leaders, we can show all the people in those organizations and all their families and communities that there is a better way of leading. We might not be able to impact the politicians, but we can show there's a better way of being in the world. But when we talk to boards, they typically, when it comes to CEO succession, say we want a ready-made CEO. We want someone who's got everything that it takes to be CEO. Why has the corner office of the CEO become a cul-de-sac on development? It's just nonsensical. But I'll give you hope. Sorry, maybe I don't give you hope. In our survey, 79% of those 400 surveyed actually said, I now know that I need to go on a transformational my journey of myself in order to transform my organization. 79%. I mean, this group of people are going to be very, very busy. That to me is really, really exciting. But boards do think that they want someone who is already there. But what does it take to be this wonderful voyager? So we believe on curiosity is absolutely key to that. These are the transformational qualities that we think are really important in someone who is going to be a transformational leader. And one of those key ones for us is curiosity. And it's not just curiosity about the world and about business, it's curiosity about yourself. If you're not curious about your own self-limiting beliefs, if you're not curious about how and why you are as you are, then you've just put a cap on your ability to grow. That's the crux. In our model of potential, there are other dimensions of that which perfectly match Erica's. So curiosity is the dreamer for us, engagement is the lover, determination is the warrior, and insight is the thinker. They just match beautifully, which has been part of the magic. But I reiterate, this is not yet in the language, embedded in the language of boards. And the fact that there are ready-made CEOs somewhere out there is pure myth. Another transformational quality is vulnerability. One word that can strike fear into the hearts of many CEOs, as we know. But it's core to this new era of leadership. But it can be a complete anathema, not just to CEOs, but to boards even more so. The willingness to say, I don't know, I haven't got a clue, I'm getting in my own way, I don't know what to do in this situation. That vulnerability needs to be encouraged. But what boards are still looking for is gravitas. They want someone who looks the part, who feels the part. In the US, you call it executive presence. Vulnerability and executive presence feel a little bit like two ends of a spectrum for me. So again, we have to reframe what we mean. Another, I think, seismic shift that's going on in society is the need for purpose. And if you talk to many boards about purpose, they still think that's a nice to have rather than a must have. But we see people coming up through the ranks where they crave meaning and purpose in what they do, where they're not seeking power for the same reasons as the leaders who went before them, where they want to ask, how can we be a force for good in society? So developing all of these transformational qualities is what we've been doing together with Mobius on the Executive Breakthrough Programme. It brings pleasure to my heart. This is about helping CEOs to find a bigger version of themselves, so they unlock their potential, but that of their organisation. And it's about getting to their deepest desires, which sometimes can be around purpose, but often they think that if they want to go there, they can't do it as a CEO. And we'd like to say, yes, you can. Or about unlocking those deepest fears that they have by saying, actually, do you really need those to protect you today? So it's a year-long program with a 1-week intensive. And the week intensive is, I've been privileged to be on many of those, led by Erica, amazing Erica, with a combined faculty. And it's been amazing to see the journeys that people go on. And they arrive high thinker, high warrior. And every time I used to hold my breath thinking, oh my word, this is a client of our firm. And what are they going to be feeling when they see a symbolic world where we're talking about nature, mindfulness, winning from within? I used to sit there and think, how many are really going to live up to the name of a breakthrough program? And now I just sort of count how many breakthroughs everybody is having and how deep do they go. But it really is very brave work. Many of you in this room are terrific thought leaders on leadership and adult development. But what we see at EBP is those theories, those very theories, coming to life before our very eyes. And it's magical. And whether it's journey work with Erica, it's constellation work, it's getting really candid feedback from us tough coaches, or bringing to life what got me here won't get me there using somatics. So it really is a privilege to have been part of this. And I think even some of you in this room have been on the programme. Amy Fox summed it up for me. She said, actually, this is so profound in its impact, and it's so ahead of its time. And as Lena's client, an Egon Zehnder client, said to me, actually, you're not running programmes here, you are creating a global movement, and he wants to join that movement. So this has to be more than a ripple across the corporate world. This has to create new resonance, the echoes of which mean that we have to be the carriers of that new type of leadership, that new tomorrow. We've also created other evolutionary programs for people before they get to CEO, which we call the Discovery Program, which Amy runs again with us. So it's all very exciting. But the point I'm trying to make is development for CEOs starts the day they become CEO and never, ever ends. The fourth assumption, if you remember, is that having a coach is how CEOs develop. So the good news for this room is they absolutely do need allies on their journey. The bad news is that the model of a single coach for a CEO is broken. One coach simply cannot be the solution for everything. Whether that's a deep identity shift, getting to understand activist investors, knowing what vulnerability feels like, there are just too many disparate needs, and one single coach, however good they are, cannot fulfill all those needs. We need to ask ourselves when we're working with a CEO, what do they need? And what are the other experts that I need working alongside me to help bring all of that to reality for this CEO? So we have to, in this room, we have to work as an ecosystem. That's how we better serve our leaders. Earlier I mentioned, we look at a constellation of leaders. That constellation of leaders need a constellation of coaches, and that's what this room is really about. Let me bring this to just one other client story. This was an early Egon Executive Breakthrough Program, and I stood on a very sunny Portuguese terrace with a German CEO, pretty stiff guy. I asked him why he appeared to be holding back, why he was on the sidelines in the room. And it turns out he'd worked with the same coach for many years. And that coach had advised him for this intensive week just to watch, don't get confused by other messages, don't get confused by other coaching approaches. So to see that CEO a couple of days later with Erica enact the Voyager, see his own patterns for the very first time, and to see what that would mean to find a bigger version of himself was just, it was amazing. And to show he definitely was not stiff. He actually went back to that hotel 2 weeks later with his wife and children to show them where it had all happened and how it felt for him. But the point of the story is that we have to be the enablers, not the blockers. And we need to know when we are maybe being the blockers. The fifth assumption, I really have got clicker problems sometimes, sorry. I'll do without. The fifth assumption is that we will have more female CEOs in the future. Well, we wish. At Egon Zehnder in London, Miranda and others have actually said we'll try and help there be 25% female CEOs by the year 2025. That's ambitious, we know. But one of the things that's happening globally is that more women are being put onto boards, which is fantastic. Boards need more women. The trouble is that it's robbing Peter, ironically, to pay Paul, because we're taking them out of the executive pipeline. So where are the CEOs of the future? We're going to have fewer female CEOs at this rate, not more. Just at a time when I think we need more of those feminine qualities to help transform organizations. We see the stark reality when we invite people to come on our programs. If you ask a guy, they will typically say, yeah, I'd love to come. If you ask a female equivalent in seniority, they're much more likely to say, oh, I couldn't possibly ask for that investment for me. Or I could not take a week out of work. So all of us have a role to play in encouraging them to demand more development and to throw themselves into the deep end. I remember so well a woman on an early program who was on a CEO succession program, but she wasn't really taken seriously. To witness her finding herself, a bigger version of herself, when previously she'd minimized herself, was just phenomenal. And to meet her at Heathrow Airport a few months later, when she was moving here to the US to run their biggest market, was just fantastic. But look, many of the qualities that we want in transformational leaders do reside in feminine power. And we see at EBP that many women disown their femininity in order to fit in and to get on. And we also see many men who just don't embrace that feminine wisdom that they do have inside them. So this isn't a male-female thing. But what we call female values do have transformational capacities. Compassion, intuition, openness, vulnerability, focus on relationships. But boards are still rewarding thinker, warrior. And they undervalue the merits of these. So until the boards understand, it will be a subset of men and women who want to be the CEO. It won't be everybody. So let me wind up by talking about what do organizations really want from their CEO. So we see a lot of CEOs who are so busy, so anxious, knowing more, trying to understand more about what's going on in this disruptive world, digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the details to find the answers when actually there may not be any answers. So they're busy, their diaries are crucifying them. They're busy knowing a lot, they're busy doing a lot, but fundamentally too many are missing what leadership actually is, and that's about being the leader. I think that today, organizations want to feel the very essence, the very presence of their leaders, particularly in disruptive times. So that shows that actually this is how we close that widening gap. If we can help CEOs and other leaders be more fully and compassionately present, I think we will change the meaning of leadership. So what will the future bring? What is the future that we are battling for? It's where there's a growth mindset in every leader. It's where leadership relies on the feminine and the masculine. It's a world in which leaders understand the value of inclusion and engagement. Let's remember, Gallup research shows that organizations with top quartile engagement have 20% higher profitability. So it's not just nice and fluffy, it's real. So what we're doing at NPI this week with all of you really does make a difference. And our partnership with Mobius feels really profound. Because we know we are building a very special global movement for a better type of leadership in the world. A more purposeful leadership, a more compassionate one that is defined by love, not ego. One which is more aligned with the universal truths, where we treat each other as humans with infinite potential rather than judging them. So that's what I'm here to take a stand for, and that's what I feel from the room as well. So thank you.
Cozy. Thank you. With this incredible vision that you started in many ways. So thank you for holding the flame, and you have never let go of it. So thank you.